This gluten-free meatloaf has a classic old-fashioned taste just like the recipe you grew up on. It's moist, juicy, and has that old-school tangy glaze coating. Hi, I'm Melissa Erdelak from the gluten-free website Mama Gourmand, and today we are going to make a classic meatloaf recipe. Now, when I'm making meatloaf, the problem with gluten-free meatloaf is the binder. So I don't like to use gluten-free breadcrumbs because A, they're expensive, or B, then you have to make them yourself before you start the meatloaf. So what I do is use something I have in my pantry already, gluten-free quick oats. That works really well at binding the meat. It has a neutral taste, and also the whole family loves it. It makes a meatloaf just like the one you grew up on. So let's make your gluten-free life a success and not a hot mess. When I'm combining all the meatloaf ingredients, I like to whisk the eggs first in the bowl and then add everything else in after it. That way you don't have to separate the eggs and whisk them in another bowl and clean more dishes. Okay, for the Worcestershire, this is an ingredient you need to watch out for gluten-free. You need to make sure you read the label and that it says gluten-free on the label. I use Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce, which in the United States is gluten-free. Weirdly, in Canada and in Europe, I don't believe it is, so just make sure you read the label. The other ingredient you need to look out for is the quick oats. Bob's Red Mill has a certified gluten-free brand. That means that it's been processed on equipment that's free of any wheat products. So just make sure that your oats are gluten-free, especially if you have celiac. So we like to combine all the mix-ins together first, and then we're going to add our ground beef. For the beef, I recommend using something about 85% lean. That means it's not so fatty that it's going to release a bunch of fat when you cook it, but it also has enough fat that it'll make it nice and juicy and flavorful too. And when I'm adding this beef, I'm just having this like throwback memory of when I was little and my mom would make meatloaf. I would pinch off some raw ground beef and I would eat it raw. And I have no idea why my mom let me do that. And I'm sure it's not the best thing to do. So I definitely wouldn't recommend that. But if you did this when you were little, will you please leave me a comment below? Or if you still do it, leave me a comment below so I know I'm not the only insane person that used to do this. Okay, so when I'm mixing meatloaf, here's like the polite way you could do it with a spoon. But to be honest, I usually get a little bit frustrated with this technique, so I just go right in with my hands. I know, this is another thing you could probably leave me a comment about, that you probably shouldn't be doing this, but I just like all the stuff evenly mixed in, and I feel like the spoon just does not get the job done. And this sound, oh my God, the sound. Okay, so our meatloaf is all mixed together. I cleaned my hands, I promise, but I'm gonna get it messy again. Okay, for our meatloaf plan, you have some options. So what I like to use is just this broiler pan because then the drippings go down and goes away from the meatloaf instead of just like cooking in the fat. And then I line it with foil so you could just clean it up a little bit easier. Your other option is there's meatloaf pans that look like a little bread pan, and then they have the same thing at the bottom where the juices can drip down, or you can use just a bread pan too. So there's no option with this. You just have to handle all the ground beef. and put it on your pan, and then just shape it into a nice loaf. Let's get all those little bits. All right, voila, we're done with the shaping. So you have some options if you cannot tolerate oats and you need another gluten-free substitute for that. You could use gluten-free breadcrumbs too, that's perfectly fine. You could use potato flakes, would be another gluten-free option. Sometimes I even do crushed rice or corn check cereal, or you could do gluten-free crackers. So instead of the quick oats, you would just use a half a cup of any of those. Okay, so now it's time for the glaze. So I use ketchup, but you have options. You can use tomato sauce. You can use chili sauce or salsa. You could even use barbecue sauce if you'd like. If you don't want all the sweetness from the ketchup, then I recommend either using half ketchup and half tomato sauce, or use less brown sugar added in. I have 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, a little garlic powder, and then onion powder. And then apple cider vinegar just gives it that like tangy flavor. And we're gonna mix all that up. Okay, before we bake it, we are just gonna put about 1/3 of the glaze on and let it bake with that smaller amount. And then we'll bake it for a little bit, and then we'll finish brushing the glaze on after. The meatloaf's going to bake for 45 minutes, and then we're gonna take it out of the oven, turn up the oven to 400 degrees, and brush on the remaining glaze. Then we return it to that higher oven and bake it for another 20 minutes or so until the internal temperature reaches 160. So what's better than a meatloaf dinner? A leftover meatloaf dinner. If you want to reheat leftovers, you have a couple options. The best way to do it is I slice it and then I put it in a little small oven baking pan with a dash of water, cover it with foil, and then you could bake it in a 250 oven for about 20 to 30 minutes. That way it stays nice and moist just like you made it. The other option is if you want to microwave it, I would recommend doing it at 50% power, just so you don't overcook it. Otherwise, like the edges will get all overcooked and the middle won't be warm through. So gently reheat it in the microwave at 50% power, and then you can finish it up at full power. Thanks for watching. You can find the full printable recipe on mommagourmand.com. And if you check out the description below, I will also have recipe links to other recipes that use quick oats for ground meat recipes like Salisbury steak or Swedish meatballs or even a pork meatloaf. We'll see you in the next video.